Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Rose Byrne, who stars in Platonic and Physical on Apple TV Plus. Rose, how does it feel to have two projects in the mix this award season, with Physical ending with its final season and Platonic just getting started on season one?
I feel grateful to talk about the work. That the strike, we couldn't really talk about season three of Physical, which was such a shame because I'm so proud of the season and it's our finale, and so I feel excited to be able to discuss the projects. And they're so very different, both of them, and yeah, it's fun to be part of such different shows.
Well, I'm going to start with Platonic, the new comedy that reunites you with your neighbor's co-star Seth Rogen. But you're not married this time, you're friends, hence the title. And I spoke to the show's creators, Francesca and Nick, and they said it was your idea to ask Seth. So how did you know he would be perfect for the role, and how confident were you that he'd say yes?
Well, I wasn't confident that he would say yes. He's such a busy guy and he wears many hats. But it just became apparent when we started talking about who could be good. And then I kind of just was like, went big and sort of was dreaming, reaching for the stars a little bit. I felt we had such a great chemistry on Neighbours, and this was similar, but also very different in that we wouldn't be a married couple. But I think that having that shared history on screen, I think just gently lent itself to this believability that we had a really long friendship. And the show lives and dies on the chemistry of Sylvia and Will, and the audience willing to believe that they have this history together. And so I knew Seth and I could kind of bring that organically.
And it looks like you have fun together. I mean, the scenes are physically comedic, the writing is fantastic. So, what was it like to dive into this character of Sylvia, this mom, and sort of maybe like a midlife crisis of sorts that rekindles this old friendship?
Seth and I, we do have a lot of fun. It's always The show is about really trying to make the audience laugh, but grounded in a very, specific time of life for both of these characters, and examining a friendship that was once something and has really changed, which I think it happens in life, and you don't often see it portrayed on the screen as much, particularly between men and women. That's something that is, not to be cheesy, but platonic. There is really no tension, sexual tension at all. Um, and the great thing about reuniting with Francesca Del Banco, well, this was my first time working with Francesca, but with Nick Stoller and Francesca, was they just write to our strengths. So I'm very spoiled in that each script would just get stronger and stronger, and they know things that I can dive into and dig for more laughs. And obviously with Seth, they have such a long relationship. So that already, it puts you ahead of the game in a way, because you've all had that relationship before. And so it was exciting to think of like, okay, what can we create with this together, having had that kind of history.
Well, it is such an interesting premise. The platonic friendship between a man and a woman, particularly when Sylvia is married.
Yeah.
Society doesn't really seem comfortable with men and women being friends for some reason, because this is a heterosexual problem. Gay people have friends of the same sex that they hang out with all the time. So, I mean, what is the core of this? Why is it that why is it men and women? Like, why is that such an issue where, it's like, oh yeah, I have lots of male or female friends, but like, do you go to the movies alone with them when you have a spouse at home? Like, these are
Mm.
questions people like, what do you think is at the core of that?
Yeah, it's funny. And when people talk about it, or friends or colleagues, people don't love talking about it. I think people think that's not true. But if you get pretty granular about it and think, okay, my best friend, this guy, whatever, like, could I go on a long weekend away with him? Would that, like, how far, that's the question you would
Yeah.
really ask yourself. And it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly what you can, what I mean, what you would do, what you would be comfortable doing, or what you're, and maybe you can, but people get touchy about it. It's interesting. They have feelings around it and they don't like to acknowledge it. And it's a funny thing to dive into. And it's a great platform because everyone has an opinion on it. And I think generationally it's very specific too. I think younger generation would think it's clueless, but it really does change, and it creeps up on you without you really realizing it. And all of a sudden, you're 44 with three kids or whatever, the Sylvia's character. And so it was a great platform. And on the show, it's very much about what everybody else thinks and their opinions about it. And we always wanted to make Charlie, played by Luke McFarlane, a very generous character and not a villain, and someone that was endearing and warm and loved, Will, Seth's character, and then slowly starts to starts to feel insecure.
And I was a little worried going into the series because I was like, okay, they're gonna hook up. They're gonna take this the rom-com route, but it never happens. And I'm so glad the show didn't go that way. It really stays true to the message. So how important was that for you, not only as an actor in the series, but also as an executive producer on the project?
It was something we were constantly checking the temperature on, and you only tell once you start making it. It's like, okay, that's what we're intending for, but people put their own ideas onto it. So it really became about how Seth and I approached the characters and approached the scenes. And it was different because we weren't playing a married couple. I weirdly didn't think about it, but we were like less kind to one another. And we're happily married in the Neighbours movies, and in this it was far more latitude to be mean to one another in that way that only old friends can, and to really almost like a sibling relationship. So I think we were always clocking it, and it became evident that it was really the characters around us that were going to be the ones commenting on it.
And I like the banter between the two. One of my favorite scenes is just when they're high in the diner and he's telling her that she has to like punch her husband above the kidneys
I
and
know.
make him finish faster, and then she goes home and tries it. I mean, what parts of the series or scenes or episodes are one or two of your favorites that you just thought were the most fun to film?
I like the secret skills episode where everybody's doing their that was very fun and joyous, and so like just so specific to those guys and their writing and the comedy, and that because it would incorporate a lot of physical stuff and just stupid jokes. So I loved that. And I like the scene where Sylvia eats the guy's name because he can't, the colleague Charlie's colleague who never remembers her name. There were so many things sprinkled throughout that I enjoyed and delighted in and could relate to, and felt that a lot of people could relate to. So yeah, those were a couple of my favorites.
And just as another dynamic to this character, she's also someone who's trying to jumpstart her career because she's a lawyer who hasn't been working. She's been raising her kids, and so she kind of judges moms in the business suits at the school pickup line a little bit, and then she suddenly becomes one. So it's kind of a fun character arc for her to go through that as well.
Yes. Yeah, we wanted to, it's obviously very lighthearted, but to have her insecurity around trying to get back in the workforce, and this whole bit she has with Carla Gallo's character with Katie about, the working moms, and, kind of making fun of all that stuff, which does exist in those sorts of, environments with parents. So the show's funny because it moves between a lot of worlds. There's like the parenting world, the home, the domestic world, and then Seth's characters, which is very outlandish and downtown and hipsters and a man trying to hold on to his youth. And so the show, I love how it moves around in all its worlds it covers.
And coming back for season two, correct?
Yes, we are. Yeah,
Yeah.
thrilled we get to come back.
Well, we can't wait for that. And then I'm going to move into sadder but still celebratory. Physical has come to an end after 3 seasons, but the best thing about it is that there was closure. We get this full story arc of Sheila. What was it like to wrap on that series and close that chapter of your career?
It was bittersweet. I loved that character. I became very close with Annie Wiseman and Steph Lang, our showrunner and our, exec producer and director. And it was really bittersweet. That was a very rich character I felt very lucky we got to make that show, and became very close with all of the cast. Yeah, so it's been definitely a bittersweet thing to come to an end.
Well, it went out on a high. It got the best reviews of any of the seasons. So some shows sort of fizzle out. So you can be gratified that, I mean, people really responded to this last season. I spoke to the creator, Annie Weisman, and she called her partnership with you the highlight of her professional life. So that's
Yeah.
a pretty bold statement. What made that partnership so special? And talk about telling her story. It's not an
Yeah.
exact biographical thing, but she does share pieces of herself and Sheila that are pretty vulnerable.
It's absolutely a big part of her life, this story, and she was always my touchstone with it. And it was a gift to play that character, bringing that story to life in many respects, not just the, the side of her eating disorder and her addiction, but her becoming an entrepreneur and looking at that for women in the 80s and how that was a really flourishing thing that was very new and hadn't really happened before to that extent, and women finding independence through economic strength. I feel after feeling disillusioned about second wave feminism. So I felt it was so enriching and nourishing, that show, just being able to throw myself into it. And yeah, it's absolutely a highlight for me as well. And I feel spoiled, it was one of those jobs where I would always arrive on set and I just I enjoyed it so much. Even the harder days were always such a pleasure.
And Sheila sort of comes to terms with herself in the final season as well and repairs some relationships along the way. Talk about her evolution this season and what you enjoyed about watching how all of that played out. And I mean, even sort of reconnecting with Bunny and like
Mm.
mending old wounds, if you will.
Yeah. It's hard to finish a show, right? It's an imperfect sort of project to do that. It's so hard, and I think Annie did such a fantastic job. And what I liked about it is that I felt like it became about a balance. Like it's never going to be perfect. It's never Her demons are never going to be fully, suppressed, but it's about accepting the voices in to a point and allowing them allowing it to take a different language in her head, if that makes any sense. But because there was so much voiceover in it, which in season 3 becomes Zoe Deschanel's character, which is sort of this inner demon that Sheila is continuing to deal with. And I felt like the show it started to try to strive for a balance instead of the extremities that Sheila was living in, of like the darkness, all this extreme success and ambition. And I feel like we were trying to strive for like showing that, you know, through some kind of balance, and it's never going to be perfect, people can evolve. And I it was really trying to show that side of her at the end. And I loved the final sequence of her looking in the mirror and echoing back to that first scene. And yeah, it's been really bittersweet. This past winter we would usually be shooting, and it's been very, very strange to leave that behind creatively.
And talk a little bit about Deirdre Friel, who plays Greta, because she's one of those characters you fall in love with. And Annie told me that role was expanded really because of her and how lovable and how much people did like her. She was one of the highlights for me. So talk about the friendship between Sheila and Greta and how that evolved through the seasons as well.
She's so endearing. She's just the most endearing character and person, but she brought such warmth to the show. And they're just so polar opposites. Sheila is wound tight. She's very close. She's hard to access. She cannot relate to people. She's very ill when she meets Greta. She's sort of in the height of her illness, and slowly they start this very strange kind of friendship, but it changes Sheila's life in a way I don't think she's even kind of aware of at the time. But that's what I always loved about it. It was like the polar opposites of these people and how they kind of helped each other in their own way in their friendship. And she learnt so much through that friendship with Greta as well. It became a huge part of the show. To Annie's point, it was one of those wonderful things that happens when you're on your show. You see what pops, and what can serve the show and what's working and who has chemistry. And we're so grateful that we had Deirdre. She's an absolute gem and so talented and funny. And yeah, I miss her. I miss working with her. We still see her, obviously, but
Will you miss the 80s of it all? Because I loved that. I love the music. I mean, the music supervisor on Physical had a really fun job, and they were very good.
she was brilliant. Isabella Summers, she's brilliant. I miss everything about it. I loved stepping into that time travel of it. It would immediately put you in place and in the scene, in the mindset. And, our special effects were always, my wig and the incredible costumes I had, whether it was the leotards or whether it was the business wear that she started to, lean into towards this final season or the early seasons, which was way more sort of late 70s, very hippie with the big curly hair. Like all of that was really fine-tuned and very specific. And I adored stepping into that world. I miss it. I feel very spoilt. And we had incredible production designers on the show who always brought every set to life with the specificities, and it would never fail to make us laugh as
Yeah.
well. It's something inherently amusing about the 80s, I suppose. But it was always a nod to that, but never too far. So yeah, and I love that, not to be corny, but the physical aspect of the show was always really important, whether it was, the aerobic stuff or stuff with Rory Scovel's character when Danny starts running, and just all those sort of fads that happened in the 80s that Annie would really tap into. But as an actor, it's always, I find, a relief when you're doing something physical, because then you can't be too self-conscious about, you're so focused on what you're doing that it becomes, it's kind of a great lesson, I think. Less time to decide your performance,
Did you get into aerobics? I mean, how many aerobics routines do you think you went through in 3 weeks?
Season 2 was really hardcore because that's when she did the tape. So I did a lot. I became very close with our choreographer, Jennifer Hamilton. She's a brilliant choreographer, and we worked from day one, like early on before each season, we would start to collaborate and just do Zoom after Zoom after Zoom of learning, getting my cardio up. And, I work out, but that's a different level of working out, the aerobic stuff. And I would like to incorporate it again, but that was I was so spoiled because every year I would have to start training 2 months in advance. We'd start to talk and she'd start to put things together, and then we would, and I would start watching all old tapes and getting into the mindset of it. And it was so fun. It was such a fun job.
Well, to put a bow on it, what do you hope people took away from this show? I mean, what have you been told? People, I mean,
I never want to prescribe how someone wants to feel or not feel, but from my end, what's been a lovely gift is people in recovery from many things have approached me about the show, not just people recovering from EDs, but whether it's drug addiction or sex addiction or gambling addiction, or I've had people come out of the woodwork to speak to me about that and say how they could relate to this, that how addiction manifests itself and how it can manifest itself in your sort of narration in your head. And so that was always really moving to me. And the great thing about a streamer is people will continue to discover, and that's what I continue to discover shows myself, as obviously there's so much to watch, so I believe people will continue to discover it. It's a really special show.
Yeah. Well, it's so much fun speaking with you, Rose. Physical and Platonic are both streaming on Apple TV Plus, and hopefully both get some recognition at this year's Emmys. It would be well deserved. And thanks, Rose.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks a lot.